Welcome to On the Front Burner new edition with me, Bogdana Nosova. What is the vision of the perspective of Ukraine from European Union countries? My guest today is Jürgen Grimm, Professor of Communication Studies at the University of Vienna. Professor Grimm, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. How the media in European Union countries represent Ukraine now? Austrian or German media, for example, how they cover current situation?
Oh, it's very similar between Austria and Germany in this case. You have to differentiate between certain periods. The time before of the Orange Revolution, there was no presence of Ukraine in the news, sometimes but very seldom. And when it was seen as an associated part of Russia, very close neighborhood. And this changed in the time of the Orange Revolution. We see there is a country with their own political willing, and he wanted to change the government and to manage the political and the economic problems. After this, we saw a lot of problems coming inside the country in a new one. And now, after the Maidan Revolution, all the media are very focused on the situation and the development in the Ukraine. You can say this is a top topic at all for all TV stations, also for the newspaper, and they report very with sympathy for the Maidan movement. This is a main tendency. There are some critical voices, but the main tendency is very positive.
What is the image of Ukraine in European Union media, in Austrian media, for example?
Yeah, you have to differentiate between the aspect of democratic values. We see that the movement of Maidan has democratic values as well as the Western countries have. And on the other side, they have some problematic views referring to right-wing positions inside the movement. It's very difficult to understand for Austrian recipient or German recipient of the media what is with the right sector. And this is a little bit a topic of unsureness, and it's not clear what is with the right thing. It gives you a feeling of there is a problem.
What kind of information you have had about Ukraine before the Euromaidan revolution and before a Russian invasion in Ukraine? Could you compare the current situation with the past?
Yes, it's similar to the reports in the media. In the time after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, I see the Ukraine as a part of a new state, and they are growing democracy, but has a lot of problems. It's societies in transformation, you could say. This is similar to what happened in Poland, for example, or Czech Republic and Slovakia, and so on. And after the Orange Revolution, we see at the first time that there is a coming up, I would say, civic society. It was an expression that the people want to have power, political power. Before, it was more a technocratic decision coming from the government to say the Soviet Union is finished, now let's make another state. But now we see that the people want it. And this was very decisive, and it was reinforced in the situation of the Maidan Revolution.
Professor Grimm, I would like to ask you about the vision of citizen of European Union. Do the citizens of EU countries are beginning to consider what the situation in Ukraine and this Russian invasion might mean for their own European system? What are the predictions?
It's an ambivalent viewpoint, you can say. On the one hand, the most of the European citizens, also the Austrian and the German ones, are very happy to see that somebody has good feelings and good thinking about the European Union. Because we have a big crisis at the moment connected with the money and the financial problems, especially of Greece, for example, and Spain. And the enthusiasm went down. And now we see the Ukraine is willing to come in the European Union, and this gives us a feeling of revitalization. This is positive. The other side is that we see that at the moment a new conflict is growing up with Russia. And I see this, I think, in a similar way than my compatriots in Austria and in Germany. That reminds us on the times of the Cold War, and nobody wants to go back to this time. This was very dangerous and very negative for economic and political development. We have no freedom of speech in this time, and these are the ambivalence coming in the view of the Austrians and the German recipients.
Professor Grimm, after the Euromaidan revolution in Ukraine, we can see the more strong support of a yearning for European integration of Ukraine in our society. Many of experts consider that as a choice between European values and all Soviet values. What does it mean for you, this term, European values?
First, let me correct a little bit your question. You asked, there is a decision between European values and what alternative. But I see no European values at all, because you can say we have a tradition of Western Europe and of Eastern Europe. And I would say, you asked me now, what is the relationship between these two directions within the European traditions? From my point of view, although the Russian part of Europe is belonging to Europe for itself. It's coming from the time of the First World War. You can say in this time, break it away. It was separated after the Russian Revolution. And, but who was the driving forces inside the Russian? A German intellectual, Karl Marx. And the impulse came from the French Revolution. But after this, the world was divided and Europe was divided. And now I hope that Europe comes back to a unit which is similar to what we have had in the 19th century, for example.
One of the main fields of your studies is the national identity issue. Integration processes in Europe put on the agenda the problem of forming a new identity, European identity, as an important component of the integration of individual countries in the European community. How can you describe this problem from inside of the European Union?
Yes, this is a very important issue for the European Union because this is a process of unification who is supranational, and it's a challenge for all the nations to balance this European identification with their own national identification. This is a new situation for us all. We have to be two types of identity. We have on the one hand the identity to belong for example, to Austria, to the Austrian peoples or to the German ones, and on the other hand, to belong to Europe. And sometimes it comes to a conflict. At the moment, we see this problem in the connection with European crisis I mentioned. And we see that we have tendencies of renationalization, and we have to fight against this, because this is a danger for the unification process within Europe. And I think for the Ukraine it's the same challenge to balance their national identity with supranational identifications, which in nowadays world is absolutely necessary, because we live in a globalized world. We cannot separate it one nation from the other. We have to cooperate, and so we have also to manage the identity problems of national and of supranational identifications.
Does the European Union has a future as a political project? This issue, which is one of more discussed in the context of searching for identity. What can you say about the division between national and European identities in European Union countries? Is this division strong?
Okay, we have a basis of common values in the European Union, not in Europe, in the European Union. This is a political organization, you can say. And this includes, for example, freedom of speech, human rights in general, democratic structures, and tolerance. Tolerance towards minorities. And we are in the European Union a multi-ethnic society, and to manage our problems, it is absolutely necessary to have a value of multiculturalism. And I think this is also a necessity inside of the Ukraine. You have also different ethnic groups and have to manage this within your national context, but also in the European context. And sometimes it's much easier to do this, the managing of multiculturalism within the European context, because here is, in this context, is very clear and you have no alternative. You have to think in different groups.
Professor Grimm, how from the European Union countries see the perspective of development of Ukraine?
I hope so. I hope so that it will go further in the democratic direction. I think it's a longer way to go. I think it's good for the Ukraine to reinforce the relationship to Western Europe, but also to develop the relationship to Russia further, because Europe need a situation of welfare, of economic development and of cooperation. This was the lessons coming from the Cold War, and I hope that the Ukraine could be a bridge state between the east part of Europe and the west part, and the real unification would include also Russia. This is my opinion.
Professor Jürgen Grimm from the University of Vienna, thank you very much for being on our program.